Hello, and welcome to my presentation of Investigating Babylon. And hopefully, this will be some incredible information to get you thinking, digging into scripture, and finding more hope in the promises we see about the return of the Messiah. Because the more we understand whom he has to battle when he returns, the more it makes sense. Everything in the scriptures, everything we see in history, and everything that we see happening in the world around us. So, without further ado, I present Investigating Babylon. This presentation is a summary of a 21-part series that we did on my channel, Kingdom in Context, last year. And I broke it up into 3 different sections: past, present, and future. The past, there's seven parts per section. And we went over some fundamental ideas of the past, of the origins of Babylon, which we'll review in this presentation, as well as the modern day versions of Babylon as a worldwide empire and some of the same behaviors we see exhibited by the nations today. And then we'll look into prophecy in the future eschatology of how Babylon comes to a final end leading up to the return of Messiah as we look into the 7 parts of future Babylon. In Jubilees, chapter 10, verse 18 through 21, parallels Genesis 11, the story of the origins of the Tower of Babel. The people, the descendants of Noah, they came together and they decided to build a tower that would reach into heaven. They wanted to thereby ascend into heaven. But I always want to draw people's attention to, it was more than just a tower. They built a city as well. So there was a lot of construction happening. The book of Jubilees gives an approximate time period of 42 to 43 years that they built this project, and a lot can be accomplished in that time. The whole purpose of this was that they might ascend into heaven, replace the authority of the Creator, and govern themselves. We're going to go into some more of that motivation. But real quick, we just wanted to kind of go over the reality of what can be accomplished in 42 plus years if people aren't fighting, because as Genesis 11, Jubilees 10 explains to us, the whole world spoke one language at that time. There was peace amongst the people as far as mutual agreement to build the project, and no confusion involved because they all spoke the same language, which the book of Jubilees tells us was ancient Hebrew, which we refer to today as Paleo-Hebrew. And as we see on the screen here, in the 20th century in the United States, in New York, the Empire State Building was accomplished in 1 year. It's over 1,400 feet tall. It's over 100 stories tall. In 4 years, the Tokyo Skytree was built in Japan. It's over 2,000 feet tall. In 5 years, the Dubai Creek Tower has been being built, and it's 4,400 feet tall once completed. The Burj Khalifa, already completed in 2010, took 5 years to accomplish. It's over 2,700 feet tall. And there's a picture of the skyline of Dubai, where the Burj Khalifa towers over all the other skyscrapers. And this entire city of Dubai was accomplished in approximately 20 years. It's a mega metropolis built literally on the sands of the desert next to the sea. And in 20 years, they've accomplished something similar to the size of New York City. It's only a wonder what it might look like another 20 years from now, given the same length of time. And this is just with the government there of Dubai doing this. This isn't all the world coming together to build one city and tower in order that they might ascend into heaven. Some of the midrash from ancient Jewish scribes and scholars speak about the motivations of the people at the Tower of Babel as best as they knew it couple thousand years ago. They give different accounts for the real cause of the building of the tower and the intention of the buildings. And one of them was that they claimed the people of the tower, whom we'll explain in a minute, was led by their first king of Babylon, Nimrod, that they claimed that God had no right to choose the upper world for himself and to leave the lower world to us. They understood the creation model that the biblical cosmological scriptures explain to us, is that we were not put on a spinning ball in space, but the Creator built a 7-story house and we live on the bottom floor, enclosed and encompassed by a firmament, which was named the heaven. And therefore, the upper world, as being referenced in this Midrash quote, was for the angels and the Father, and we live on the bottom of the creation model. Therefore, they wanted to build a tower with an idol on the top, holding a sword, that it may appear as if intended to war with God. So they're already worshiping and engaging in idolatry by the time they come together to build the tower. We're going to go over who they were worshiping and why, both pre-flood and post-flood. The building of the tower is meant to bid defiance not only to God, but to also Abraham, who exhorted the builders to reverence God. So a lot of folks don't put two and two together and see that Abraham actually was alive in this generation. We're going to go over some of those verses that give us a clear understanding of that as well. Abraham was a man of righteousness, well respected by the people of his area, feared by some even, and was not a part of Babylon. He removed himself from Babylon at the age of 14, started following Yahweh, according to the book of Jubilees. And similar to Genesis 11, Jubilees parallels the account that they all abided with one purpose, but there's a unique prophecy included in the account of Jubilees where Yahweh explains that they will no longer, the nations that he dispersed when he overthrew the Tower of Babel, Yahweh says, they will no longer abide with one purpose until the day of judgment. We're going to talk about that as we get closer towards the end of this presentation, as how the world comes together to fight Yeshua at his return, which is the culmination of the 42-month reign of Apollyon. So this is a unique prophecy in the book of Jubilees that explains the reality of the world we see today. The nations do not abide with one purpose, but at a specific time in the future, under the reign of the first beast, they're going to all come back together again to try to fight Yeshua at his return. Jubilees chapter 8, 1-4 also goes into great depth to explain some of the genealogy from Shem's line through Arphaxad, Selah, Canaan, and the specific child named Canaan who was being taught writing, which is an indication that he was being trained in understanding how to read and write for the purpose of being in the priesthood. It says that he found the writings of former generations that have been carved on a rock, and he read what was on it and transcribed it, and then he sinned owing to it. For it contained the teaching of the watchers in accordance with what they used to observe the omens of the sun, moon, and stars, and all the signs of the heaven. So now we find a post-flood descendant of Noah finding hieroglyphs, writings, carvings of some sort on a rock that allowed him information from before the flood, specifically of the rebellious watchers who came down from heaven, took wives, lain with them, created giants as offspring, and created mass corruption in the earth, which we're going to review here in a few minutes. Jubilees 8 goes on to connect directly that Canaan's descendants, Eber, married the daughter of Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is the Greek transliteration of the name Nimrod. This is also found in Genesis chapter 10 and Septuagint. Arphaxad fathered Canaan, Canaan fathered Selah, Selah fathered Eber, as well as the Nimrod, the name of Nimrod is found in the Septuagint as well, because it's the Greek version of the Old Testament. But in Genesis, this particular gentleman named Canaan, the same guy that found the teachings of the Watchers, and then his grandson married the daughter of Nimrod, that they're all alive in the same generation. We only find his name listed in the Greek Septuagint of Genesis 10, but we also see his name listed in the genealogy in Luke chapter 3, verse 36 and 37. But for some conspicuous reason, it's actually removed from the Masoretic version of the Bible and those manuscripts, just in case you're looking in your Bible trying to find it right now. We also see in the Septuagint, the word Nimrod is used for Nimrod in the verses that are paralleled in the Masoretic translation of the Bible in Genesis chapter 10, 8-12. And it also goes on to explain the beginnings of his kingdom, as well as the origins of the Philistine and the Caphtorim, which were nations of giants, rulers over the Mediterranean in different regard. So we have more quotes from the Midrash, people that were claiming, ancient Jewish scribes and sages claiming that one of the central reasons that Noah was told after he got off the boat with his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that they were to spread out, that God also commanded them to send colonies abroad for the thorough peopling of the earth. But they were so ill-instructed, they did not obey God. They imagined the prosperity that they were enjoying not to be derived from the favor of God, but supposing that their own power was the proper cause of the plentiful condition they were in. Therefore, they did not obey Yahweh's instructions to spread out and populate the breadth of the earth. Instead, they centralized. And they were suspicious that if they did spread out into colonies, that they would be divided easier or easier to be oppressed. All of it was not trusting the instructions of the Creator. So it was Nimrod at this time that excited them to such an affront and a contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, who was a bold man and of great strength. And he incited people to believe that it was their own courage which produced their happiness. He also gradually changed the government to tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. And if this isn't a parallel to what we see with many despotic, socialist/communist, totalitarian-minded governments and corrupt leaders in the world today, then I don't know what is. This is literally the origins of a socialist communist system, which we also refer to in our overall Investigating Babylon series. In part 10, I refer to it as a collectivistic authoritarian society, of which ancient Babylon was the first to institute this type of government and oppression over its people. This is the origins of socialism and communism, is ancient Babylon. Nimrod also excited the people to believe that he would avenge them on God for destroying their forefathers in the flood. And the multitude were ready to follow Nimrod's determination and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. So now they're not just atheist or agnostic, they're full on occult. These are people that view God as an enemy because this is the beginnings, post-flood, the beginnings of the cult. It starts with the Tower of Babel and the entire government structure within that city. And as a result, as we know from Genesis 11, Jubilees 10, and also repeated by Josephus in Antiquity of the Jews, that the people of that time, the whole construction project was dismantled and overthrown by God himself, by Yahweh. And as a result, the people started speaking diverse languages, which was a miraculous event that he got them to actually spread out, which was his initial desire for them. So this was the judgment that we still see on the earth today, that will not be rectified until the second coming of Yeshua and the reigning kingdom on the earth. And this is also talked about in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. We also see in the Antiquity of the Jews that it's recorded that as they left the tower, that there are priests of Jupiter, a version of Jupiter, successor, Ares, Jupiter, and Yalis. This was a different old Greek name for what was commonly referred to as Ares, who was the son of Jupiter, or one of the descending successor gods. The point is, they're worshiping the same pantheon of Zeus and Jupiter, which was the ancient. Jupiter is one of the different names for Zeus in antiquity. And so they were already worshiping Jupiter, who is also called Zeus. Well, who is this person? Why are they already worshiping him? We're going to break down his identity, his character and history, where he is in Scripture. He was the god of the sky and thunder and the king of the gods in ancient Roman religion and mythology. And the Romans regarded Jupiter as the equivalent of the Greek Zeus. The Romans were the successors to the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire was around much, much longer, all the way back to the days of the Tower of Babel, and they always referred to Jupiter as Zeus. Now, we see in Zeus's hand a funny, unique shaped weapon. You can see him holding in his hand, not the staff, but the other hand. He has this unique weapon that seems to flay out with knives on each end, but that I would suggest that's a depiction that's not quite showing knives, but it's a specific concept called a vajra. We also see this in other nations, both Egypt and India, because remember, the people, once dispersed from the Tower of Babel, speaking their own languages, still remembered all the events that happened during the tower, so they still worshiped the same gods and had the same mechanisms of control. They just now had to learn each other's languages to coordinate as peoples. The vajra was the weapon of Lord Indra in ancient India. Also, we see some of the other versions of it held by some of the other gods of India and Egypt and Greece. But it was a powerful device that could not only destroy the enemy in the form of attacking flying machines, and that's going to be something we're going to dive into here in a few minutes, but it also had the ability to cause rain, and it was a symbol of fertility. In itself, the vajra itself is a thunder of 1,000 blades, which means lightning, and forged from iron, gold mixed with bronze or stone. This is an actual handheld device that they claimed. The ancient writings of the ancient Vedic texts claim that the vajra was able to control the weather or autonomous flying machines. That's a pretty big claim, and we're going to delve into that both in history and in science. Here's another version of the vajra that we see some of the gods holding that's synonymous throughout the different cultures, both India, Egypt, and Greece. And there are different versions of them holding it in their hand in different ways, different statues. This is Vishnu, the serpent on his back, the crescent moon on his head, the vajra in hand as a symbol of his staff and his power and authority. We're going to go over who Vishnu is and identify him in Scripture. And here's another depiction of Zeus holding a version of the vajra, more in a staff form. We see him on another coin that dug up from ancient Greek settlements. This is from India and from different parts of Nepal and Asia, different forms of vajras that have been discovered over time, relics of the past. Here's Zeus in a Greek depiction on a clay pot holding a vajra as if he's about to attack. There's more examples in a museum of the Vajra, different versions of it, different designs. And here is a massive Vajra that was discovered and put on display that's in Nepal. As you can see the people standing next to it, you can get a scope of the size of this type of Vajra. Because remember, as the scriptures tell us, and as ancient hieroglyphs and ancient depictions tell us, there were giants in the past. And many of them were the rulers of the nations. So it would be right that they would need a Vajra that can fit into their hands. Another depiction of the Vajra is found in the staff of Ra, and it's often associated in the hieroglyphs with the Ankh, which symbolizes resurrection, as well as the power of the backbone of Osiris, which is this pillar on the left with the four little layered ledges at the top of the pillar. So these three rings all go together. We're going to delve into that a little bit later as well. We see the Vajra mixed with the Djed pillar and the Ankh in the hands of the ancient statue of Ptah in ancient Egypt, one of the successor ruler gods under Ra. We've got Poseidon, one of the versions of the ancient Greek world. Poseidon, to my understanding, was a version of someone what we're also going to define as Hades and Hermes, and a Greek equivalent of Vishnu to India, carrying his own staff. Then we see Ra in ancient Egypt carrying the staff as well in this depiction, where he's also in a boat that was considered his flying vessel, his flying boat of a million years. I understand that this particular depiction is him on water fighting the sea serpent, but there's other depictions of the boat of Ra flying in the air. We're going to get into that in a minute. Another ancient depiction of Zeus with the bird. This is very common since he's the equivalent of the Germanic Odin, who always sometimes showed up as a traveler with a bird as well. This is very common. And what's interesting to me is that when you have an electrical plasma discharge through a particular type of current, like an alternating current that we see from a Tesla rod, it's not the same as an actual direct current that we would see with traditional electricity that can, be very harmful to the touch. Whereas the alternating current that can be displayed and discharged in this manner, not only does it look in an outward profile like something that would have been depicted of a Vajra, but it's also safe to the touch. So, did they really have a stick that could produce lightning? I don't know. It's hard to say. But if they wanted to create a parlor trick that it convinced the people that they could command lightning and they could create somehow a plasma discharge with alternating current like a Tesla rod from a handheld device as a parlor trick, well, that would definitely make the people think they controlled lightning. And it wouldn't hurt them to hold it. Just some theories. So it's still unknown exactly the extent of what the Vajra could do or, the claims that are being made of it. But I think it's very interesting because we see it connected with other symbols of power, staff, authority, the agricultural and the financial stability of the nation, as well as the ruling leadership. Now, the pillars of the Djed itself are also everywhere throughout Egyptian hieroglyphs, and they're strongly associated with Osiris, who was under the authority of Ra. And we're going to go into the equivalence of the Greek, what's called the Theban Triad or the Theban Trinity, which is the three Patreon head rulers of Egypt and how we'll see their equivalents in Greece and India. But there's even museums that highlight the Djeds that have been dug up with archaeological digs from ancient India. We see them exemplified as holding up what some people think was an ancient light bulb. It's hard to say. There's even a museum that believes it was an ancient type of light bulb and that the Djed was like a transistor that helped illuminate it. And that's why they've recreated this in a museum according to their interpretation of what it might mean. But we see the pillars of the Djed everywhere on the architecture and on the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. As I said before, they commonly regarded it as the point of power and the backbone in a metaphoric style, a backbone of Osiris, which was his strength. It's very interesting. It's also said of the Djed that in some of the ancient literature from Egypt, they believed it was a source of power that allowed Osiris, whom I'm going to show throughout this presentation, is the Egyptian equivalent of Nimrod. They believed that the Djed was the actual mechanism that allowed to turn his mortal flesh into immortal flesh. We're going to go into some of those concepts and those claims as we continue to unfold the presentation. Another thing that we see commonly throughout both Egypt and India and Greece is the sphere. The sphere is also a massively obsessive object to the ancient gods. And by the end of this presentation, you'll know why. We see Anubis in ancient Egypt holding a sphere and highlighting it. The sphere is also often represented with Ra, and there's a reason for that. Also wrapped in the serpent, there's a reason for that. But it is, now a lot of people would say, well, I thought Ra was the sun god and that was the sun on his head. We're going to explain why that misconception is alive and well, but what it really is. Just another depiction of Zeus from ancient Greece holding a version of his power stick, the Vajra. So when we read verses in Revelation chapter 2, 8, and 9, where Yeshua is speaking to the churches in Asia Minor, and he's speaking to Smyrna, explaining that there are people in the Smyrna congregation who claimed that they were Jews, but they were actually not. They were lying. They were false. They were actually of the synagogue of Satan. That's because the synagogue of Satan is a term for one of the temples of Zeus that was in the area of ancient Asia Minor. And there's lots of relics and archaeological evidence that we're going to review that this is a well-known and established fact. They didn't view Satan as a mystical figure that can't ever be seen. They literally claim to have interacted with Zeus, whom the scriptures refer to as Satan, and that he actually had temples throughout the earth where people worshipped him in different cultures. And he is the one being referred to as Satan in Revelation chapter 2, having his own synagogue or his own temple. Now, this is the ancient map of Pergamum, and the different churches that are being, some of them are being mentioned in Revelation chapters 1 through 3. And we see that Pergamum is what we now call modern day Turkey. And Smyrna itself has been excavated to a particular degree. And you can see one of the ancient temples of Zeus in Smyrna. Here's a recreation of one of the bigger temples in ancient Turkey or ancient Asia Minor that was a temple to Zeus. It's in a museum, transported. This, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this particular one was originally excavated and refurbished by Hitler, which was taken to Germany, the capital of Germany, and then it was removed from there to, I believe, the London Museum. This is a recreation of that same temple for Obama's inauguration speech. I'll let you guys draw your conclusions on that. And we see another depiction from an ancient sculpture of Zeus with a sphere in his hand, and one of the female goddesses of ancient Greece, Diana, being held up on that sphere. All the symbolism is always consistent. It's always there. Here's one of the ancient busts above one of the buildings where Zeus is the prominent patron god with all the pantheon of gods below his authority. We also have Helios, which is the equivalent of Osiris in ancient Greece, and we're going to review him, as well as Mercury holding the caduceus. He is the equivalent of Anubis in ancient Greece, and we're going to review him. He's also often called Hades. And then of course we are going to talk about chimeras and Nephilim, as these were a large predecessor of enforcement, and some of them ruled as gods in different areas, but this was a part of the ruling class often. So we want to look at the post-flood giants. This is important because there is a distinction. There is a difference between the pre-flood giants and what their fate was versus the post-flood giants being more prevalent and of different shapes and sizes and not having the same capabilities as the pre-flood giants. So let's look real quick at the pre-flood giants and exactly what that looks like and how this breaks down. We have mentions of them, introductions in the book of 1 Enoch, also Genesis 6 and Jubilees chapter 5, explaining that they came to the earth on a mission to originally help mankind, but instead of helping mankind, they actually took wives and started their own family. They rebelled against their mission that God sent them to do, and instead they decided that they wanted to do their own thing. They began to teach mankind different forms of sorcery, enchantments, charms, the cutting of roots that made them acquainted with plants, and then the women became pregnant and bare giants. And I'm going to explain some of the ideas in that. We also see this parallel in Jubilees chapter 5. In addition to this genetic manipulation that was being implored by these rebellious angels against mankind, they also taught mankind lots of other wickedness and unlawful behavior. This is what's mentioned briefly in Genesis 6, 1 through 5, but is expounded with greater detail in Jubilees and Enoch. Jubilees 7, also goes into great depth about how Noah saw all these things, both pre and post flood, and decided to start fervently teaching his sons after the flood to try to do what's right, since he saw that the pre-flood giants had now lost their bodies, but were disembodied spirits working with Zeus, working with Satan character to deceive mankind again. So this was an immediate spiritual battle right after the flood for the sons and grandsons of Noah, for their hearts and their minds to follow Yahweh and not Zeus. So let's break down real quick some of this idea of the enchantments and what that is according to the scriptures. According to the Hebrew, it's definitely something that's considered secret arts or tricks. It's something that's considered incantations and sorcery or spells. And this is often used throughout the scriptures in different places. This is the idea of an enchantment. Okay. It's a spell, an association, or a company, depending on its use. We see that the use of this in Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 11, where Yahweh is discouraging the people of Israel to not participate in this behavior, right? He tells them, do not do these detestable things that these other nations are doing. Don't pass your children through the fire. Do not do divination, witchcraft, sorcery, omens, spells, mediums, spiritists, or necromancy. Stay away from that stuff. Isaiah 47, 1 through 5 goes into a reprimand, a prophetic reprimand of Babylon, and talks about how it's labored in sorcery since its youth, because this is the overall motivation and the spiritual backdrop to the beginnings of the Tower of Babel, the collection of the peoples rebelling against God, and then how they kept that rebellion in their own culture with their own language as they dispersed. We look into some of the practices of Babylon that actually were consistent after the flood, as well as we see was consistent with the Satan character, the Azazel character from before the flood, and it was the idea of creating giants. Now, there's multiple ways to do it, and this is what I want to always remind folks. There's more than one way to create a giant. From a biological standpoint, as we read from 1 Enoch 7, the rebellious angels offered information to mankind that they were striving to learn, but that Yahweh did not want them to know because they knew they would abuse that information, and we see them immediately abuse it and delve into idolatry and genetic manipulation. So, but the angels that were rebelled, they did teach that information to mankind, showing them that there were, as it made them acquainted with plants, and then they bear giants. Well, that's because the roots of plants and trees have certain hormones in them that control the different types of growth when they're ingested or when they're applied. So there's 5 major types of growth hormones that are in the roots of trees and plants, called auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins, ethylene, and abscisic acid. Gibberellins are widely used in modern day. In fact, in the 1960s, the United States military came across this idea of gibberellins and how it can be considered a helpful growth hormone to plants, and that it is the main ingredient that you found in Miracle Grow, stuff that you see on the shelf in Home Depot. So we see evidence throughout all of history of ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient Babylon all having giants. All of them had giants, and they all talked about it and even drew pictures of it. Now, modern historians will try to tell you, but the same people that reject the Bible, they will try to tell you, oh, they didn't have giants. They're just drawn bigger to show their importance and their power as a ruler. That is absolute not what the ancient history says. So I'm not going to take their word for it. I'd rather take the word of the scriptures, which is easily validated by the ancients as well. So Jubilees chapter 8, 1 through 4, we'll go back to the guy named Canaan. This is post-flood, a couple of years after the flood, the guy who found the carvings of the watchers from before the flood on the rock and started practicing their teachings. And it says he didn't tell Noah about it because he knew Noah would be angry. And I think that was probably true. Noah would probably be very angry that they're picking back up these rebellious practices that caused the flood itself. So we do see this gentleman named Canaan. He's mentioned in Jubilees. He's also mentioned Genesis 10:24, as well as Luke chapter 3 in the Septuagint and in the Greek New Testament, because he is a son of Arphaxad who rebelled, and his great daughter-in-law or great granddaughter in law from Eber's wife married was the daughter of Nimrod. So there's a close family connection, is what I'm trying to get at, as far as where the rebellion came from, how closely the information, as far as picking these practices up again, as well as they're still worshiping the only angel that didn't get locked away from before the flood, which is the Azazel character. Now, that's a whole separate study in itself, but this is why we would generically refer to that character as the dragon or Satan, but the ancients didn't refer to him with such mystical or Catholic trappings of description. They referred to him as Zeus, a real character they would interact with, would show up from the people to time, sometimes as a public display and sometimes in secret. But the point is, he was someone that was physical, that interacted with people, and they claimed he had a home where he lived, how he interacted with people, and they knew who he was and where he was. And that, like I said, the Romans, a later culture, they called him Jupiter. The Greeks from the Tower of Babel days called him Zeus. So even in the Babylonian cultures in Mesopotamia and Samaria, we see depictions of the gods in the sky in a flying machine holding a Vimana, which is the claim of the Vimana, that it controls flying machines. We see multiple depictions of the gods flying through the air. And before you might say, well, Sean, that's just your interpretation of that depiction of that hieroglyph, we have literal written documented evidence from ancient India that there were flying machines, and specifically the gods used them. And we're going to go over that here in just a few minutes. Here's one of the depictions from ancient India of some of the diagrams of the Vimanas. Here's another one. Ancient India. There's also a curious little sphere in the top left corner. That'll make more sense later. This is a Vimana. It actually looks like the tip of a SpaceX or NASA capsule. And that's the reason for that, because NASA steals a lot of their ideas from ancient India. We're going to talk about that briefly throughout this presentation. We went into great depth into that in part 12 of our original series. But we're gonna highlight some of the ideas throughout this short presentation. Here's another ancient depiction of a Vimana, translated and drawn to spec in 1923. Here's more ancient Vimanas. One of them is even found carved on a rock. Now, some of these, this is what's called a Pushpaka Vimana, which was a much larger Vimana that could hold large numbers of people, upwards of thousands of people. It's like a floating city. Here's another ancient depiction from India of Vimanas in the background, flying in the air. Those are not sombreros. This is ancient India. And those things in the backdrop are not hats floating. Those are Vimanas. This is a very common thing throughout all of ancient India. Here's many of the different versions described in the Vedic texts about the ancient flying machines. They're different descriptions. One of them, as you can see, looks exactly like a flying saucer. The Sundara Vimana looks exactly like a flying saucer. Here's another depiction of people on the ground giving homage to the gods, and the Vimana flying in a boat in the sky. And it's no wonder that even over in ancient Egypt, the same stories are told about Ra flying in a boat in the sky. Here's another depiction of Ra in the boat, as well as his Kefra depiction, which is Ra in the avatar of a beetle. This idea of aliens, I mean, for the last 70, 80 years has just been nonstop, every year pushed with every form of media you can imagine. Comic books, magazines, movies, TV, everything you can imagine, guys. Literal government agencies talking about it. I mean, they've got what the government agency called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I believe that's where they have all the telescopes and everything, and they're pointing them at space, and supposedly they're just pointing them at the firmament. But
like in the movie Contact, Jodie Foster.
Like Contact, that's right. So they have millions and millions of dollars going towards the propaganda that all this alien stuff is real. But guys, we want to try to share some ideas with you from history tonight that hopefully will help you understand this is nothing new under the sun. This is actually repackaged, just like we've said on this show, and also on my channel. NASA, their whole theology, their whole view and teachings of the heliocentric cosmology is repackaged from ancient India, and specifically from Vishnu and some of the multiverse and cosmic belief sets that was propagated by Vishnu and Brahma from ancient India. So another unique parallel with ancient India are these ideas of Vimanas. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Vimanas are what we're seeing in the sky when people take home video and when clips are being released by the news. In ancient Sanskrit, Vimana means measuring out and to traversing. Basically a craft that goes forward, right? Mm-hmm. The Bowden professor of Sanskrit at Oxford University in England in 1890 translated the word Vimana as the chariot of the gods. But we're not talking about the god of heaven and earth. No. We're talking about other gods, Nephilim gods. So it goes on to say, the Pushpaka Vimana was a gigantic plane the size of a large city, entirely capable of holding unlimited numbers of people, as stated by Professor D.K. Kanjalal's observations of the Matsya Purana, which is one of their Vedic texts, their religious texts. So guys, this is telling you that they had massive, what did we see Wes plays in movies like Independence Day?
Yeah. I mean, so many of them.
A big plane that could be an entire city by itself.
That would fill up the entire camera angle view of the sky, at least. So yeah, a made massive city-sized craft, and as big as this creation is, it would not. I wouldn't put it past the elite to have something like that hidden.
That's right. And they go on to expound about what these things were, how they worked. There's an incredible amount of information in ancient Sanskrit that details who flew them, how they were used for war, how they controlled people, how they were given to the gods. And so right here it says in Sanskrit in the Samaranganana Sutradhara, I don't think I said that right.
You did pretty good.
It's an ancient Vedic text, and it says it's written that the strong and durable must the body of the Vana be made, like a great flying bird of light material. Inside, one must put the mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus underneath, by means of the power latent in the mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion. The what? The mercury engine sets the driving whirlwind in motion. What do we see from all these UFO sightings? That these planes or these craft that are moving through the clouds are usually spinning. I got a picture.
Yeah. Okay, I got
later.
you.
Driving a whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in the sky. The movements of the Vimana are such that it can vertically ascend and vertically descend, and moving slanting forwards. These descriptions are incredible. Moving slanting forwards and backward. With the help of the machines, human beings can fly in the air, and heavenly beings can come down to earth.
All right.
Interesting.
How interesting. How old would you say this? Like
these texts are supposed to be 3,000 to 4,000 years old. These are just a few descriptions. It goes on to say in another passage, according to the Dranaparva, part of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, one Vimana described was shaped like a sphere, and it borne along at great speed on a mighty wind generated by mercury. And that also is referred to as quicksilver. Mercury is also known in history as quicksilver. So it goes on to say, in the Laws of the Babylonians, which is this particular book that was written in Mesopotamia in Sanskrit. I'm going to go over the history of that in just a minute, because a lot of people are going, wait a minute, I thought the Babylonians were in Mesopotamia and the Indians were in India. What's going on here? Just give me a minute, I'll explain. In the Laws of the Babylonians, written in Sanskrit, part of the passage of the Hakata, it unambiguously states that the privilege of operating a flying machine is great. The knowledge of flight is among the most ancient of our inheritances, a gift from those upon high. We received it from them as a means of saving many lives.
No,
guys, what have we been talking about? About the false Christs that would appear. What's the world been prepping through all these movies with aliens, that there's good aliens that are going to come help us to fight off the bad aliens.
And what is a Christ? A savior.
A savior.
Saving many lives. So wild.
It's crazy, guys. So this is ancient Babylonian depictions of Vimanas used by Babylonian rulers in Mesopotamia. They're everywhere. They're literally sitting in one of these saucer-shaped crafts in the sky. So it goes on to say, a lot of people may be asking, Wes, right, but wait, Sean, I thought Sanskrit was an ancient Indian language. Why are the Babylonians in Mesopotamia talking about it? Well, Peter Sahata, he actually is a historian as well, and he explains that during the mid-second millennial, which is 1500 BCE, this is probably during the days of Joshua, Indo-Aryan tribes migrated both east into India and west into northern Mesopotamia. And through an Indo-Aryan wedge, as new waves of Indo-European migrants came down into present-day Iran, the earlier wave was wedged apart. Those who went west became sort of a ruling elite of the Hurrian people to form a powerful Mitanni kingdom. The evidence for this is seen in a treaty between the Mitanni and the Hittites. The Hittites, well, that sounds biblical.
It sure does.
Sounds like the Amorites and the Hittites that lived right next to Iran in Assyria. Okay, so anyway, I'm being a little facetious, guys. Just the point is, all these tribes and cultures work together. The Bible is super relevant. This is the people that the Israelites were dealing with that were worshiping false gods. Those false gods and their rulers had crafts that they actually flew in the sky to perpetrate deception and power over their peoples. This is why they received worship as gods. This is why the God of the Bible was so intent on telling the Israelites, hey, don't believe all that. They're not real gods. They had deceptive signs and wonders even back then. So it goes on to say that the Mitanni Sanskrit is considered to be a slightly more archaic form of Sanskrit than the Vedic Sanskrit. Sadly, these people seem to have got lost in subsequent history, but thankfully, those who went to India are keeping this tradition alive. If you guys check out that series, I go over the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, all those guys, because they all had the same tech. They all had this. They all shared the same theology. They just had different names for it because they spoke different languages after the tower. So it's the same deception perpetrated on every nation. That's why they all worshipped a version of Baal. Here's the point. In the Indologist, William Clarendon, so another Indian researcher and expert of ancient India, he says he has written down a detailed description of the Mercury vortex engine in his translation of the Samaranga Sutra Dhara, and he quotes this: inside the circular airframe of this craft, where the engine is, place the Mercury engine with its solar Mercury boiler at the aircraft center. By means of the power latent in the heated Mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in a most marvelous manner. 4 strong Mercury containers must be built into the Vimana. The Vimana develops thunder power through the Mercury.
Oh yeah, they're building these things right now behind our backs.
Oh yeah,
they have been
thunder power.
Yeah, this is.
If they have this much detail, like that's all they need. Like, okay, we can figure this out.
Well, you guys remember that specifically Hitler took a whole group of SS to ancient Tibet and ancient India in the 30s, specifically seeking out the information of the Aryans, which they believe were the gods. Yeah. And this was how those guys traveled around. This is what we talked about in my Kingdom Cast episode about the Bell Project, the Nazi Bell Project. Yeah. So this here it goes on to say, according to this is going to be a tough word. I'm going to try it though. This is another text from the Vimana Sutra. It goes on to say, according to the Rahasya Ginahadi Hakarai, Sutra number 2.
Very good.
The pilot, it's talking about the pilot of Vimanas. The pilot is one who knows the secrets. There were 32 secrets the pilot needed to learn from the competent preceptors, and only such a person was fit to be entrusted with an airplane, and no others. There are 32 secrets of the working of the Vimana. He must know the structure of the aeroplane, know the means of its takeoff and ascent to the sky, know how to drive it, and know how to halt it when necessary, how to maneuver it and make it perform spectacular feats in the sky without crashing. Those secrets are given in the Rahasya Laha. And this, I have a citation at the very bottom here. It's from this quote is from the Aeronautical Society of India in present day by G.R. Joycer, International Academy of Sanskrit Research from 1973. It goes on to say this is a specific maneuver one of those pilots had to know how to do. And it's called the Gudha. As explained in the Vayatatavava Prakarana, I totally messed that up. I'm sorry. If anyone's out there from India, I'm so sorry. It says, by harnessing the powers, the yasa, the viyasa, the prayayasa, in the 8th atmospheric layer covering the Earth to attract the dark content of the solar ray and use it to hide the Vimana from the enemy.
Bruh.
Guys.
Self-technology.
Guys, what are we looking at? This is the official Navy photo released to the United States of the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Blacked
out.
UFO.
It's blacked out. How many of these have we seen where they're blacked out? And you wonder, why are they blacked out? Why can't I get any description of them? Why can't I see?
There's no details in it, right? Yeah. It takes the dark content of the solar ray, like dark matter.
It's manipulating. You know how in the it's manipulating the different types of light within solar light.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's putting off some kind of glow, it looks like.
This is just one maneuver. I'm going to get to another one where it makes it shine. You guys ready?
Yeah.
This is
like it's like names for anime attacks. Go ahead.
Yeah, literally. This is the Drashya. This means to be unseen. By collision of the electric power and the wind power in the atmosphere, a glow is created whose reflection is to be caught in the Vishwa Kriyadrapana, or it's a mirror at the front of the Vimana. And by its manipulation, they can make that shine, that glow, as camouflage over the Vimana.
Yeah, because it's not blacked out there; it's whited out, and that is we see that in
we see that all the time.
Videos. Yeah,
all these home videos of people catching these glowing orbs going through the sky at crazy speeds of defying left, right, up, down, defying physics. Supposedly, they're glowing. You can't get a beat on them, even with modern good cameras. They literally have their own version of stealth camouflage, black and or glowing. This is an ancient technique from ancient Vedic texts.
That's wild.
Nothing new under the sun, guys. Nothing new. This is why they don't want anyone to know history. They have to
teach all these watered down versions. They spend how many years teaching you about the American Civil War and the American Revolution and the War of 1812. But how many times did you learn about ancient India culture and history of the gods?
Or 4,000-year-old flying machines? It would completely contradict their narrative.
This right here, this is triangle UFOs, and that's the shape of the Vimanas, which are also triangles. I'm going to go over that in a minute.
Has that same glow, that same technique with the light.
So watch this, guys. I'm not going to go through the whole video. We'll cut to about right here and watch what happens. This is just some random dude filming up.
Whoa.
Here it goes.
What's he going to do?
You think it's going to disappear? It starts to shine.
Oh!
Oh.
Who was that? Was that from the audio of the video? Or
Yeah, that was the random guy that was filming it.
He said, "Oh."
The ancients believed not only did they document in writings in their history as well as their religious worship that the gods that they served and were ruled over by traversed through the sky, but they also taught that they lived in the sky. Specifically, Zeus, who lived on what was called Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. And we're going to look at about that idea as well. Many Renaissance paintings is depicted as some sort of, chapel up at the top of the clouds. But it also had what was considered the family gods that would go up there and convene, and they would make decisions about how they were ruling mankind. The difference was that they all practiced and promoted a behavior and afterlife theology, which is the opposite of Yahweh the Creator and his son Yeshua. And we see this depiction being all over the very famous chapels, mansions, castles. Artists were commissioned to draw the different gods that inhabited Mount Olympus, both Zeus and Hermes, as well as Helios, whom we're going to break down the different names that these gods have as we continue to go. Now, in the Iliad and Homer's work in the 7th century BCE, a Greek poet and writer, he talks about a description of Mount Olympus where Zeus lived, which he said that then troubled were the gods of heaven throughout the palace of Zeus. And so this is very interesting that we see that this place in Mount Olympus was referred to as the palace of Zeus. I think that's fascinating. And it was in the heaven, which is in the clouds in the sky above, not above the actual enclosure of the firmament, but just in the high altitude sky above. We also have another gentleman, Publius Virgilius Maro, in a book called Aeneid, book 10, from approximately the 1st century BC. A Greek writer or a Roman writer, I should say, is actually speaking on Mount Olympus and a description of it as well, saying, "Meanwhile, Olympus, the seat of sovereign sway, threw wide its portal doors, and in a conclave fair the sire means authority, of the gods, and the king of all of mankind, Zeus, summoned the immortals to his starry courts, where high enthroned the spreading earth he views." That would make sense if it's high above the clouds, high in the air. It says, then it goes on to say, beneath the double-gated dome, the gods were sitting. Now, I'm going to explain here in a little bit as we further look at eclipses and different things. It's not the actual firmament that he's calling the double-gated dome. It's actually the enclosure of Mount Olympus, the encapsulating enclosure of Mount Olympus that he's calling the double-gated dome, of which they were sitting in the palace of Zeus in the sky above, with the earth, the plane of the earth spread below them. We also have antiquities of the Jews. Like I said, I mentioned they were already worshiping Zeus when they got and rebelled at the tower. So this is a unique connection here that Satan has already went out to get his hooks into the people before they even came to build the tower, with a greater rebellion amongst all of mankind. We see depictions of Mount Olympus throughout comic books, movies, ancient depictions on hieroglyphs, as well as in modern movies. The Germanic lore and theology refers to it as Asgard. And here's some modern depictions from a Marvel movie, the Thor franchise, where they have the equivalent of Ra, which would have been Odin, sitting in front of what looks like the Egyptian boat of Ra, which is very fascinating, and his throne, as well as these unique spheres, which will make more sense as we get to the end of the presentation. There's just a lot of symbolism, as well as the version Thor, which is the version of Helios, who would have been under Zeus's control, or Osiris under Ra's control. Now, this is a fascinating part of the presentation to me because I've always been a kind of a nerd like science fiction movies, but there's another fascinating claim of Mount Olympus in the ancient history record that Zeus had his own automatons, that many of the gods had their own automatons, and specifically there was a inventor under Zeus's control named Hephaestus who would create these automatons for him. So therefore, in Homer's Odyssey, it speaks of this concept, the palace of Alkinoos, which is the king of the Phoenicians. Golden doors closed the palace in, and silver posts rose above the threshold. The lintel was of silver, the door handle was of gold. Each side of the door were gold and silver watchdogs, deathless forever and unaging, which Hephaestus, with his wit and cunning, had fashioned as guardians for the great house. So this ancient depiction of Hephaestus with these guardian dogs, these were not alive. They were automatons, as is being described in the ancient record, that he had built for a specific king. Greek literature records that Zeus commissioned Hephaestus to create the giant automaton Talos to guard the island of Crete. We see a depiction of that in modern movies, Jason and the Argonauts, of the giant robot Talos. In ancient Egyptian legends, statues of divinities, mostly made of stone, metal, or wood, were animated and played a key role in religious ceremonies. So I do want to draw a distinction here in the different types of automatons. Some were very basic, kind of like the ones that Leonardo da Vinci built for the King of France in the 1500s. They could move, basically walk across the floor, put on a show, maybe turn their head. But then there were other more advanced automatons that could actually assassinate people and guard kings and rulers, fly through the air. It's very interesting history that's never been presented, but it's all written down for us. Chinese chronicles tell of emperors fooled by realistic androids and describe artificial servants crafted in the 2nd century by the female inventor Huang Yuying. Techno marvels such as a flying war chariot and animated beings also appear in Hindu epics. So when we look at Helios, or Osiris, is considered someone that flew across the sky in a chariot of horses, or also I think his name is Shaurya, the equivalent Indian god of Shiva, is another avatar of Shaurya, the equivalent Hindu god that was equivalent to Helios of ancient Greece. He also flew across the sky in an animated chariot. So it's an intriguing story from India. They tell of robots that guarded the relics of Buddha. This is well known in Indian and Hindu culture. Traditionally, the statues of giant warriors stood on guard near treasures, but in the legends of Ajatasatrutra, guards, I don't think I said that well. The legends were extraordinary. They were robots in India. Automatons, or mechanical beings that can move on their own, were called Bhutavahanavyancha, or translated spirit movement machines in Pali and in Sanskrit. What spirit is animating the machine? For anyone that's under the age of 35, perhaps you've heard of a very popular anime series called Ghost in the Machine. Very, very common in anime and in science fiction that some life force ends up animating the robot and turning on mankind. This has foundations going all the way back to ancient Babylon. Hindu and Buddhist texts describe the automaton warriors whirling like the wind, slashing intruders with swords, recalling Ajatasatrutra's war chariots with spinning blades. In some versions, the robots are driven by a water wheel or made by a Visvakarman, the Hindu engineer god. And this is a picture of him on the left. In this tale, many Yantakara, which robot makers lived in the western land of the Yavanas, Greek speakers in a Roma Visaya, which is the Indian name for the Greco-Roman culture of the Mediterranean world. So now we have another connection, like I've been trying to portray, that the Indians, the Romans, the Greeks, the Mediterranean, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, they all collaborated. They knew about each other. They shared rulers. This is the great deception and perpetration over the people. So even to the point of knowing they all had automatons that guarded their rulers. It's very interesting. The Yavana's secret technology of robots was closely guarded. The robots of the Roma Visaya carried out trade and farming and captured and executed criminals. This is the Hindu texts claiming that the Greco-Roman culture in the Mediterranean had robots that could carry out trade, farming, and death sentences. We don't hear about this in normal history books. Robot makers were forbidden to leave or reveal their secrets. If they did, robotic assassins pursued and killed them. In ancient China, a curious account of automata is found in the Lai Zi text, believed to have originated around 400 BC and compiled around the 4th century CE, wherein it describes a much earlier encounter between King Mu of Zhao and his mechanical engineer known as Yan Shi, also called an artificer, right? In case anyone who's a biblical scholar, that rings a bell. In Genesis chapter 4, there's a gentleman named Tubal-Cain who was an artificer of all metals of tools. The latter proudly presented the king with a very realistic and detailed life-size human-shaped figure of his mechanical handiwork. Now, this is King Mu of Zhao, whom this artificer had created an automaton before him and presented it to him. And then the king stared at the figure in astonishment. It walked with rapid strides, moving its head up and down so that anyone would have taken it for a live human being. The artificer touched its chin and it began singing, perfectly in tune. He touched its hand and it began posturing, keeping perfect time. And the performance was drawn to an end. The robot winked its eye and made advances to the ladies in the attendance, whereupon the king became incensed and would have had Yin Shi executed on the spot had not the latter, in mortal fear, instantly taken the robot to pieces to let him see what it really was. So the inventor of the robot did more than the king expected. The inventor of the robot immediately started dismantling the automaton to save his own life. And as he dissects it, it says, and indeed it turned out to only be a construction of leather, wood, glue, and lacquer, vicariously colored white, black, red, and blue. And in examining it closely, the king found all the internal organs complete. The liver, the gall, the heart, the lungs, the spleen, the kidneys, the stomach, the intestines. Over these again were muscles, bones, and limbs with their joints, skin, teeth, and hair. All of them were artificial. Has anyone ever seen the modern series Westwood? The king tried the effect of taking away the heart and found that the mouth could no longer speak. He took away the liver and then the eyes could no longer see. He took away the kidneys and the legs lost their power of locomotion. The king was then delighted. Ancient India had intimate ties with the Mediterranean world, with the Greek world, as well as Egypt. They were all descendants of the Tower of Babel. This is an ancient depiction of Mount Meru, which is the Indian equivalent of Mount Olympus, the home of the gods, the homes of the rulers. Mount Meru in ancient India is depicted as being higher than the Himalayan mountains in the sky above. This is for scale. This is a little picture to show you the height of the Himalayan mountains versus where they believed Mount Meru was located. Not the center of the earth over the North Pole, but high in the sky. That's the point of this diagram. There's ancient depictions from India about Mount Meru in the sky and all of the Vimanas that are traveling to it, flying in the sky with people inside of them. Apollo, also called Helios, is the Greek counterpart to the Indian Surya, but a mechanized chariot of horses that he flew through the air as a display of the people to his power and his being a god. And it says, the chariot harnessed by 7 red mares or by a mare with 7 heads, he traveled across the sky or the space around Mount Meru, later called Mount Kailasha. It was the abode in the mountains where the gods dwelt, ruled by Varuna, guardian of the cosmic order. And we're going to explain very quickly in the future about the cosmic order and the breakdown of that, being that it was literally the name for the spirits, the unclean spirits ruled by Satan in the sky. That was the origins of the word cosmic. And it's also the same word that's being used in the New Testament in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. Surya is the Indian equivalent, like we see the Mesopotamians as Shamash, also Apollo to the Greeks, or Helios. Helios and Apollo are identified as the same god in ancient Greece. India's portrayal of Mount Meru, high above the earth, Greece's portrayal of Mount Olympus, and Germania's portrayal of Asgard. Ancient Babylon. Ancient Babylon has had consistent practices throughout the centuries. They have a structure of how they deceive mankind. It's a plan. They follow a blueprint. And that blueprint has 5 major pieces to it: collectivistic authoritarianism, warfare, child sacrifice, weather control, and sorcery. We're going to go over some of those still easily observed in modern day cultures throughout the world. As we've already discussed, collectivistic authoritarianism is the roots. It was the tyranny of the government of Nimrod as the first king of Babylon, deceiving the people to be afraid to worship God, or to think it's cowardice to worship God, and to think that their bravery was their own procurement of happiness. How interesting that we see modern culture shouting certain antisocial concepts with the agendas, shouting how brave they are to stand up for those agendas. And they're all anti-God as well as the other sexual social agendas we see being pushed on the nations. So this is what I showed you, that it was Nimrod who excited people to be not follow God, and he gradually changed the government to tyranny. The 20th century, I know we're taking quite a leap from the Tower of Babel to a more readily example that people can look at, because now we're moving into the middle part of our presentation that we talked about. I've broken up 21 parts, 21 different videos for the full presentation. So now we're just looking at some of the modern examples and observations of how Babylon still rules the nations and has the same practices, just as they did in ancient times. Joseph Stalin talks about dividing the world into regional groups as a transitional stage to world government. Later regions can be brought together all the way into a single world dictatorship. I mean, if you're not familiar with history, Stalin was one of the most cruel rulers of ancient Russia in a communist state. Modern day Klaus Schwab, the turtle guy, founded, of the World Economic Forum. This is a very dastardly man, like a modern day Bond villain, if you will, as far as what he proposes for mankind: depopulation, world enforcement, full totalitarian world government. He also, in his narrative about the Great Reset, he talks about the third and final priority of it is to harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution to support the public good, especially by addressing health and social challenges. So this is diplomatic, political speak for this is how we can gain greater control through the Great Reset. We must harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution, which is the tech. They have to harness new technology to gain greater control over the people. And he says, imagine what could be possible if someone concerted efforts were made in every sector. That means every region around the world. We can then start tracing with diagnostic therapeutics, the V word, creating mechanisms for tracing people that are potentially sick with imaginary things, and then also deliver telemedicine. This is a plan through medical tyranny to collect all the people groups of the earth under a totalitarian control. Warfare has always been a part of how Babylon has controlled the nations. 1 Enoch 8, verse 1, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. As I shared before, Azazel is the only angel of the 200 that rebelled. He's the only angel that did not get locked away before the flood and still is around after the flood. He's the one scriptures generically refer to as Satan or the dragon. 1/10 of the unclean spirits, the disembodied Nephilim from before the flood, now unclean spirits without bodies after the flood, still on the earth. 1/10 of that number was given under his control. This is expounded upon in the book of Jubilees. But the point of Azazel is that he was an angel that taught mankind warfare. Jubilees 10 as well, we see in the third week of this Jubilee, unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah and to make them err and destroy them. The sons of Noah came to Noah their father. They told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and blinding and slaying his son's sons. That's his grandchildren. So they're off the boat. Grandchildren are to be born. They're being attacked by Shadim, the unclean spirits, demons, and they're trying to figure out how do we got a problem here. Noah goes and prays to Yahweh. He says, you know how your watchers, that's those rebellious angels, the father of these spirits, so he's acknowledging when these spirits originated from before the flood, just as Genesis 6 tells us, imprison them, please, and hold them fast in the place of condemnation. Let them not bring destruction on the sons of your servant, my God, for these are malignant and created in order to destroy. So 9/10 of them, 90% of them were imprisoned. 1/10 was left out and under the control of Satan to continue trying to tempt mankind into unrighteousness. This was just the decision of the Creator that their men need to have some sort of test of obedience in their life. But one of the things that erupts all throughout history that has never stopped, because the angel that taught mankind warfare is still out on the earth, still deceiving the nations into warring with each other and killing each other. Many different ways that the warfare happens is through different vehicles and through different strategies. One of those strategies is underground military bases, access tunnels, and places of refuge. There's an underground city in Turkey that's been built. This one supposedly could house 40,000 people. They don't know exactly when it was built. Underground city in Greece. In Guatemala, archaeologists have mapped 500 miles of underground tunnels. It's very fascinating. 500 miles of underground tunnels. How long did it take them to dig those? There's underground military bases in most first world countries. Here's an example of one in Russia. Here's one in Italy. United States, they're all over the place. Look up DUMBs, DUMBs, deep underground military bases. Here's just a public photo that's released of one they're building in Seattle, underneath Seattle. And this is one of the machines they use to drill them and to excavate the dirt and dig as deep as possible. It's a massive drilling machine. You can just see the people standing next to it for scale. It's massive. And this gentleman was a very, I won't spend too much time on him, but he was just a part of the deputy director of engineering and construction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And after World War II, he said this should be the focus of all first world nations, specifically the United States, is to develop underground facilities for military projects. It is no wonder that Yahweh, through the prophet Amos, expresses in Amos chapter 9, verse 1 through 4, that even though the enemy may dig into Sheol, into the heart of the earth, from there he will take them. And though they ascend into heaven, Mount Olympus, from there I will bring them down. Yahweh is expressing to the enemy through the prophet Amos, no matter where you try to run and hide, no matter where you think you're safe, it's my creation. He created everything. He has the power to bring them down from the clouds, to pull them up from the depths of the earth where they try to hide. And we see in Revelation 6, at the coming of the Lord, at the second coming of Yeshua, the kings of the earth and other people want to hide in the caves of the rocks of the earth. I don't think it's any coincidence that most first world nations, which are still worshiping Zeus as a part of their leadership structure, would want to create places for them to hide from the wrath of the Lamb, just as announced in Revelation. Another consistent practice of Babylon, of how they deceive the nations, is through sorcery, as we already mentioned earlier, with the incantations and charms taught by the rebellious watchers from before the flood, and that information is carried over after the flood as the nations began to still worship one of the rebellious angels from before the flood, this Azazel character, also called Zeus. A part of that is sorcery. As I said before, Enoch 7, this is where the idea of charms and enchantments and sorcery. Also mentioned in Jubilees chapter 7. We see that the giants were rulers all over the earth and had a presence on the earth as rulers, with all types of archaeology that's being uncovered and not reviewed in mainstream media. So there's another version of sorcery, not just genetic mutilation to make giants, but also the eating and drinking of blood. Genesis 9:4, Leviticus 19:26, Acts 15:20, both Old and New Testament, the consistent instruction from Yahweh to faithful believers of Israel, which is the disciples of Christ, is do not eat blood. Do not eat flesh with a lifeblood. And you must drain it out, pour it on the ground, put dirt over it. There's a process expounded upon in God's law of how you are to not eat blood. And this law didn't change in the New Testament. But the occult, people that worship Zeus, people that worship the pantheon of the evil trinity of Zeus and Osiris and Anubis, they still practice something called spirit cooking or cannibalism, where they eat and drink flesh and blood. It's talked about. This has actually been recorded and reviewed by mainstream media. This is a particular person that's highlighted as someone in this community, whom is considered an artist. She calls herself an artist, but she's not an artist. And she's also running with some of the most wealthy and influential people in the world, not only Bill Gates, but also Jacob Rothschild. It's very interesting. This lady, this Abramovic lady. Most people would refer to this as a high-level witch. Zechariah 9:7, Yahweh specifically is admonishing the rebelliousness of Israel by claiming that when he cleans them up and brings them into good behavior, they will stop eating blood, that he will take the blood out of their mouth and the abominations from between their teeth, because they were transgressing the law for how they should not only eat animals, but also the rituals of ancient Baal worship, which is also ancient Zeus worship and ancient Apollo worship. What cannibalism was involved. It's horrific. Another version of sorcery that we see consistently practiced by Babylon throughout the years is inculcations, or also the V word. Several accounts from the 1500s describe smallpox inoculations as practiced in China and India up to 1,000 years ago. This is not anything new. Some even date it all the way back to 200 BC. But the 18th century, it became more of an evangelistic effort, and certain high-level ladies or duchesses, I'm not sure their exact aristocrat names, but they became a group of women that would go around and make sure that people were being treated for the sicknesses of the day, specifically smallpox, and they would try to do proper inculcations. Now, without trying to get too gross, I just want to share that the ancient Chinese method of inculcation was that you would take the scab or the sore from the sickness and scrape off the scab and grind it up and then have people snort it. They thought that made you more powerful against the disease. It's just sorcery, guys. This is not good at all. This is another example. I'm not going to read some of this for anyone that's watching. I'm just going to allow you to read it yourself. I'm not going to, you can pause the video if you need to as I go through these, because if I say some of these words, the stream could get shut down. And I V words up there. There's some things talking about the different types of juice that it's found within. That's constantly being pushed on the public. Not only is there different types of things from human abortion, but as well as from animals, from cows, from pigs. There's different types of ingredients. This is directly from the Center for Disease Control, and it's an ingredient list. I'm not going to say any of these words or these names, but I'll let you read these things that I've highlighted in this ingredient list that tells you what's in this juice. And it's the opposite of what the creator says to put in your body. This is a part of ancient Babylon's sorcery where they get you to take poisons. I don't have the actual citation right now, but there's historians that have concluded that from the writings of ancient Egypt that they document medical practices where the ancient Egyptians were literally taking feces and rubbing it into their open wounds because they were told that they would heal them. So it's the opposite of what the Heavenly Father, the Creator, the righteous one that we're supposed to be following after. It's the opposite of his behavior. It is the ways of Babylon. They want to create versions of cannibalism, and whether you know it or not. So this is why these things are highlighted and listed on this ingredient list that you're reading on the screen. It's everywhere, and all types of them. Everywhere. Another version of the sorcery that is found consistently within ancient Babylon and even in the modernity is something called transhumanism. There's a growing movement, and it's a philosophical movement right now, but it also tries to incorporate different types of technologies as a part of it. It's the idea is to eventually make mankind better than he was created. It's an absolute affront to the Creator. And there's multiple different groups that are out there. There's something called the 2045 movement, and they hope to have certain milestones achieved by the year 2045. The military, as you can imagine, is greatly interested in different types of transhumanism. And one of the big claims is that if they develop AI that's artificial intelligence, to a certain sophistication, that they could actually transfer the consciousnesses of people and not have to have actual warriors on the battlefield. Instead, they're just automatons with the consciousness of a real human. There's multiple depictions of that, write-ups about that. There's studies being done on if that's possible, and they're trying to accomplish it. This particular guy, I did this presentation. I did this presentation at a conference recently, and it was aired on YouTube. And when I read this particular part, all of it was cut out, and I don't know why. So I'm just going to leave this on screen for you to look at. Hopefully this part won't be cut out. You can pause it if you need to. And this part was cut out, and I don't think even the person that hosted the video realized it was cut out. It was just automatically cut out by YouTube. Revelation 13, 16 through 17 said he had the power to give life unto the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This is the idea of artificial intelligence. The second beast has the power to create something that looks like the first beast, and he can give this created type of thing, this automaton, this image, this moving bust, this statue, this idol, he can give it the ability to speak and cause other people to worship the first beast, just like we see from ancient automatons that were idolatrous in the past. And this is considered yet to happen in Revelation 13 in the 42 months leading up to the return of Messiah. Another consistent practice of ancient Babylon is child sacrifice. We see this is a report of the abortions throughout the world from all the different countries. As you can see, the Planned Parenthood over the USA bar is there with a little Planned Parenthood logo, the double owl eyes. But China is leading the way in over 9 million abortions annually. This is horrific. And this, of course, is against the Creator's instructions. 1 Enoch 69:12 and Deuteronomy 18:10 talk about do not destroy your son or daughter or pass them through the fire. And specifically, one of the rebellious angels mentioned in 1 Enoch is said he's the one that taught mankind how to smite with the wicked blows of spirits and demons and the destruction of the embryo in the womb that it may pass away. So this was a common practice in the ancient world in Zeus and Baal worship, where they would create these big statues, some of them which were large ovens. They would heat them up with fire and then give a live child to it to be sacrificed. This is something interesting. This is in the United Nations meditation room. So in the United Nations meditation room is an awkward-shaped trapezoidal room with a stone center block, no chairs, no benches, no kneeling benches, no prayer rugs, just a solid block of stone in front of this awkward painting, very abstract painting. So I was looking at this in years past, and I said, why this painting? Already the meditation room is not like any other meditation room we see at like a hospital chapel or something. It's already looking very ominous. So why did they choose this particular painting? So I just thought to myself, well, what if I played around with it? I know that the ways of the enemy, they like to invert things and show things backwards. So I said, what if I took this painting and doubled it and then flipped it around and laid it on itself? And lo and behold, it's an owl. An owl is one of the symbols of Molech, of child sacrifice from the ancient world. It's also the convenient logo of Planned Parenthood. We all know what this was. Big ritual in the woods to a big owl. If you could take an overview of the Capitol grounds in Washington, D.C., it's literally designed like a big owl. And the owl itself is a common signifier of secret societies and clubs, secret clubs that high-level people join or dignitaries join. And you'll always see an owl in the architecture on the front of that building. There's an owl hidden in a dollar bill, the same dollar bill that has the all-seeing eye of Ra on the back with a pyramid. You'll have an owl on the front of it, hidden in the top right. Deuteronomy 23:17, since we're speaking about the owl signifying the ancient Babylon, as well as being a symbol of secret societies, Deuteronomy 23:17 in the Septuagint mentions this very unique passage. There shall not be a harlot of the daughters of Israel. There shall not be a fornicator of the sons of Israel. These are people that would have both engaged in temple prostitution in the temples of Baal and Zeus. There shall not be an idolatress of the daughters of Israel, and there shall not be an initiated person of the sons of Israel. That is the definition of someone that joins a secret society. They become an initiated person. Weather control has always been the final leg of the 5 pillars of deception perpetrated on mankind from Babylon. They've always had weather control. Remember we talked about with the Vajra, how it claims, ancient Indian Vedic text claims that the Vajra that the gods owned and manipulated could control flying machines as well as the weather. It could cause rain. Here's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HARP, in Alaska, started and technically and officially released and started in 1994, but a lot of people think that it's been ongoing for a long, long time. I'm putting forward that it's actually a integral part of Babylon's deception and control over the people to create crises where which they can govern with more tyranny, and that they've been using this for a long time. This was literally why they would praise Osiris in ancient Egypt, because he would, quote unquote, bring in the flooding of the Nile to allow them to have a good harvest and crop that year. I don't think there's anything new under the sun, just different versions of the same ancient deceptions. Here's an overlay of the different HARP facilities built all around the world, not just in Alaska, but in almost all these different countries. But this is on a what we would consider a traditional map. But if you put it on a biblical cosmological map, it looks more like this. The Vajra supposedly controlled the weather. Very interesting. God of thunder and lightning, the god of the sky, the god of storms. That was the name for Zeus. That was the moniker for Baal. Leviticus 26:17-20, Yahweh tells Israel in part of his covenant, expounding to them that I will set my face against you, that you will be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you will rule over you. If you will flee when no one pursues you. And after all this, if you will not obey me. So this is the covenant promises that if you rebel from his good and great instructions on how to live in love and peace with each other, you start doing wickedness and doing these behaviors of Babylon, then these bad things are going to start happening to you. And a part of that is, he says, and after this, if you will not obey me, I will proceed to punish you sevenfold for your sins. I'll break down your stubborn pride and make your sky like iron and your land like bronze, and your strength will be spent in vain. Your land will not yield its produce. The trees of the land will not bear their fruits. The crops, the agriculture are affected. There's drought. This is in the same way that Yahweh has mastery and control over the weather. The false gods also want to claim to have control over the weather. And whether they do and they can, maybe even in short spurts, is still up for debate. But the point is, intricately as a part of the governing tyranny of people and the weapons of war to attack other nations, weather manipulation and weather control has always been a part of Babylon's pillars of deception. Wisdom of Solomon 16:24, the Creator gives a good instruction as far as how the creation, including the weather, can be on your side, right? That if you do his opposite, that if you do bad behavior that is not the Creator's behavior, the creation is going to work against you, okay? But if you do his good and loving behavior, the creation works with you. And he says in Wisdom of Solomon 16:24, for creation serving you who made it exerts itself to punish the unrighteous, and in kindness it relaxes on behalf of those who trust in you. So it would make perfect sense that, and in two regards, the enemy would want to figure out how to control the weather, both to counteract the creation that is rebelling against them because of their bad behavior, right? And also to manipulate and use it as a tool of war to affect other countries around them. So it's very interesting, this idea of weather control and the attempt to have it. This is why we see in this moment in Matthew chapter 8, when Yeshua has control over the storm. He wakes up from the nap by his very frantic and fearsome and worryful disciples about this storm that they're experiencing, and he wakes up and he calms the storm. Well, that's because the creation, on behalf of those who trust in you, relaxes in kindness for the righteous. So the people that trust in Yahweh are those who are doing his behavior. They're obedient to Yahweh, and the creation will work with you. This is also an example we see, not just with Yeshua, but in the prophets of ancient Israel. We also are going to see that in Revelation 11 with the two witnesses. James chapter 5, 17 and 8 reminds us of Elijah and how he had access to that type of power of Yahweh because of his obedience. He was a good prophet. He was righteous and faithful to Yahweh. So then we see in Revelation 11, 3-6, the introduction of these two gentlemen in the last 42 months leading up to the return of Messiah, during the same time that Apollyon is let out, which is the first beast. And so it's interesting that they have the power to shut up heaven so it doesn't rain while they're prophesying, and they have the power over waters to turn them to blood and smite the earth with plagues as often as they want. And people are trying to kill these people. If you read the whole chapter 11 of Revelation, people are trying to kill the two witnesses, but they can't until the end of their testimony after 42 months. And then finally, it's the first beast who kills them right before the great resurrection. So it's very interesting that it's almost as if the Father is giving to his witnesses at the end of days the same power to counteract the first king of Babylon who returns and tries to rule over the nations again. So this is the hierarchy that's listed out in Revelation 13 about the structural hierarchy that what's the Egyptians called the Theban triad, what the ancient Indians would refer to as the Blessed Trinity. So this is the idea of the dragon, which is Ra or Satan, the first beast, which is Apollyon or Helios or Shiva or Osiris, and then the second beast, which we identify as Nergal or Era or Hermes or Hades or also Vishnu. This is Zeus, Ra, or Brahma as the top of this pantheon, the king of the palace of Mount Olympus. This is what we'd refer as the dragon in Revelation, or Satan. Hades, also called Anubis and Vishnu by other cultures, is the second beast that we see in Revelation 13. Apollo, Osiris, or Shiva is the first beast we see in Revelation 13. This is the unholy trinity that we see worshipped all throughout history. This is the three of them in ancient Egypt. This is the three of them in ancient India. Again, just a quick reference here for the dragon and the different names he was referred to by the different cultures: the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Indians, Sumerians, and Babylonians, the Mayans, the Germanians, the Israelis, ancient Israel, the people of the descendants of Shem, through Abraham and Moses. Again, Azazel was the dragon. He is the dragon. He is the one of the rebellious angels who was not locked away. His judgment was proclaimed in 1 Enoch 9, but the fulfillment of that judgment does not take place until the second coming of Yeshua, when Michael wraps him in a chain and throws him in a hole for 1,000 years. So this is the storyline of the rebellious angel we refer to as Satan, listed out in Scripture. We also have the second beast that was often and most famously referred to as Anubis. But we find him in Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, chapter 35, mentioned out as Nergal, one of the Babylonian gods. He had his own temples and his own, he was over commerce and war. Very interesting. 2 Kings 17, Nergal is mentioned as well from the men of Cuth. These are men that came into the land of Samaria and brought their own gods from Babylon. One of them was Nergal. This is also considered Hermes or Hades to the Greeks, and Anubis to the Egyptians. The first beast is Apollyon or Helios, also referred to as Nimrod, the first king of Babylon. The Egyptians called him Osiris. The Indians referred to him as Shiva, the destroyer. Babylonians referred to him as Hammurabi or Baal, and the Canaanites and Akkadians also call him Baal. Osiris is a Greek transliteration of an ancient Egyptian word, Ashur. Again, there's interconnection between all these cultures. They weren't separate. They all ruled together. They just learned how to do it once the tower happened, and they went away speaking different languages. They realized, all right, we need to present ourselves that in a cultural way to these new peoples so that they respect us and let us rule over them and, deceive them. Ashur was the head of the Assyrian pantheon of gods and the patron deity over the city of Nimrod in Babylonia. And of course, as I showed you before, Genesis 10 and the Septuagint directly shows us that Nimrod, the one we saw in Jubilees chapter 8, is the Greek transliteration of the word Nimrod, who was the first king of Babylon. In Micah chapter 5, both in the Masoretic and the Septuagint, we see that the land of Assyria is associated as the land of Nimrod, or Nibrod. Now, some of the ancient Greek texts I said that wrong. Some of the ancient Egyptian texts talk about Osiris was the god of the resurrection, closely associated with the Ankh that you would see. He was the only god that was promised to resurrect and come back onto the earth. It's why he's referred to as the Phoenix. He's the successor of the great cosmic god Tumun-Ra, or also called Amun-Ra in earlier versions of Egyptian history. The great successor of the cosmic god. What did we talk about? This word cosmic, which is cosmos kratos in the ancient Greek, was a word that specifically depicted the unclean spirits that lived in the air and were ruled in the air by Satan. And this is why he's called Osiris, is called the soul that lives again. Now, the ancient Egyptian story is that Anubis originally was the right-hand man of Ra, but then when Nimrod came along, he kind of took over Anubis's position as lord of the underworld and as the second-hand man to Ra. And that's why they call him the successor in authority. But I think it's very fitting because these three we see again in Revelation when the dragon shows up and gives his authority to the first beast, which would have been Osiris. And that's exactly how it was portrayed in ancient times. It's like the Satan character, the dragon. He's truly the ultimate point of authority, kind of like he tells Yeshua in Luke 4, Matthew 4. But ultimately, he allows the world to worship the patsies he puts up to be the front men, which is the first and second beast, to deal with the people, basically. So it's a power dynamic, a power play where the rebellious one, the Satan, can just stay in the background, but yet he's got his front men to go out and rule in his authority. And the Djed, like I said before, is a unique and mysterious object that has some research about it, but ultimately historians, all they can read about it from some of the texts is that it was considered the power source that changed Osiris into an immortal being, which is why he's promised to come back on the earth again. And here is people putting the Ankh, the Djed, and the staff of Ra, the Vajra, into one piece, and they claim it's a form of an induction coil with copper around it, and that it actually is some sort of tool, they believe. It's very interesting. These are all associated together. But in Revelation 9:11, we see there's a king over them. These things that come out of the bottomless pit, out of the pit of the earth. There's a king over him. In Hebrew, his name is Abaddon, and in the Greek, he has the name Apollyon. So we don't have to wonder who this guy is, because ancient history has clearly told us Apollyon is Helios, is Osiris, it is Shiva. It is the right-hand man underneath Ra. It's all laid out in history. And many people ascribe the mark of the beast to be associated with the first beast, which is Apollyon. But it's not. It's actually the second beast. And that's what's interesting to me. In Revelation 13, 16 through 17, it says, "And the second beast required all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead." Now, and then it goes on to, say that it's the number of the beast, and for the number of a man, that number is 666. Well, this was a character that was considered a god in ancient times. Like I said, the Babylonians, Akkadians, they called him Nergal or Era, and they also called him, the Greeks called him Hermes or Hades, and the Egyptians called him Anubis. The Indians called him Vishnu. The modern Buddha today is a new and a more modern avatar of Vishnu. I mean, it's the same gods that are being worshipped around the world since the days of the Tower of Babel. And it's the mark of the beast, and the number of the beast is associated with the second one, not the first one, in the actual chapters of Revelation 13. So doing some research, I thought it would be interesting to see if Apollo, Zeus, and Hermes, this unholy trinity in the Greek language, if there was any gematria that might lend to 666. And at first glance, you don't see it until you put it into a sphere, which is going to make a lot more sense when we get to the end of this presentation. But we see that the overarching 333 represents the Ra character as the greater, larger sphere. Excuse me, the first beast character, the Apollyon character, as the greater, larger sphere. Inside of it is the two gray circles that have a specific diameter based off the gematria of Zeus, that when you put them together, it forms an eye in the center, like the all-seeing eye. But then the three spheres inside of that, based off the gematria of the name Hermes, broken down in the Greek language, fits three spheres inside of that with an ending number of 0.666. Now, the 353 is commonly known amongst the occult and people that are fascinated with the occult as this character Hermes or Anubis. They know that who this is. So does the Vatican, by the way. They have an actual statue with the caduceus of a Roman version of what they called Hermanubis. So when the Romans took over, they realized that the Greeks and the Egyptians had the same god. What the Greeks called Hermes, the Egyptians called Anubis. So the Romans just called it Hermanubis. They realized it was the same god. They knew who it was. And so does Rome's Vatican. Why is there a statue to him in the Vatican? But this is a guy named Maynard. He makes his own wine, and he has a wine called the Caduceus 353 on the front with the sphere, as well as Anubis at the bottom for that particular brand of wine or that particular series of wine. Anubis himself is not always represented as the wolf or the jackal in ancient Egypt. He's also the Sphinx. He's also the lion-headed man, or the lion with the head of a man. And this particular statue that was on the right-hand side of the Sphinx that's more well-preserved, as you can see underneath the body of the lion, he's laying on 9 bows. So this was representative in ancient Egypt that Anubis was the god of war, and he was this is one of them that shows that he's over the 9 bows of Egypt, which is the military might of Egypt. He was also over commerce and trade. So how interesting that the mark introduced in Revelation 13 is about those who buy, sell, and trade. And if you don't take this mark, you can't buy, sell, and trade. Oh, and by the way, he's the one that creates the AI automaton in the image of the first beast, Osiris, that if you don't worship it, he's going to come kill you. So he's the god of war and the god of commerce. The second beast is an integral part of the story that is often overlooked and hardly ever identified in Scripture. He had different incantations, different versions, what the ancient Indians would call avatars, different representations of this god in the different cultures. And one of them was a lion with the tail of a stinger. He's also highly associated with the scorpion. What do we see coming out with the Polyon in Revelation 9, 1 through 11, except for these chimeric, lion-headed, scorpion-tailed things, flying locust-like things? This is one of the ancient depictions of Hermes or Anubis or Nergal, the second beast. But now as we move into the end of our presentation, we see that there is a very strong reason why the gematria of these numbers fits so perfectly into a sphere above all else. And it's because it is the heart of Mother Babylon, and we're going to explain that.
If people can talk about dark bodies in the spinning heliocentric globe expanding universe model, then why couldn't we apply the same thing to the flat earth enclosed model? What if there are dark bodies within the dome? Robotum continues. We have now seen that the existence of dark bodies revolving about the luminous objects in the firmament has been admitted by practical observers from the earliest ages, and that in our own day, such a massive evidence has accumulated on the subject that astronomers are compelled to admit that not only dark bodies, which occasionally obscure the luminous stars when in conjunction, but that cosmological bodies of large size exist, and that, quote, one at least is attached as a satellite to this Earth, end quote.
So this idea of ancient Egypt worshiping Ra and all its symbolism of Ra, the all-seeing eye, it's much more obvious than historians ever want to acknowledge. And we're going to go and break this down, that the ancient world and the modern world gets curiously and unnaturally excited about eclipses. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why do they make such a big deal about it? And they always have. We're going to explain why eclipses are so elusive and mysterious, why it's never described in the scriptures, nor even in the accounts of Enoch, where it explains the heavenly bodies in the firmament and how they move throughout the year and the seasons. The eclipse is never mentioned. The eclipse is a ominous event that the world gets super excited about. Very interesting. But the ancient depictions show eclipses, and specifically over Ra, the hawk-headed version of Ra, where there's a sun with an outline and another circle in the center of that sun above his head. We see it in multiple different depictions of Ra. It is the all-seeing eye concept that is the top of the pyramid power structure of ancient Egypt. It is a part of the scarab, the thing that the scarab beetle, the Keferet version of Ra, holds in the sky. is the black sphere. This is a part of Khepri, the sun god, was a beetle-headed version of Ra, another avatar of Ra, specifically because beetles were renowned for flying and also for being able to roll things into a ball and hold them over their head. And this is the depiction. Specifically, they would roll little balls of dung, and then they would put their nests inside the balls of dung. But there's all types of beetles. There's even a beetle that refracts light so that you can't see it normally, and it just looks white. It's very interesting. It has a special type of skin. It's very interesting that all the eclipses that we do see documented, specifically the ones in the last 20 years, they all happen on new moon days. So specifically, the Great American Eclipse of 2017 was also specifically on a new moon day. That's supposedly the day when the moon cannot be seen in the sky. We see this also again in many other times throughout history. 2012, another great eclipse on the new moon day. But the scriptures itself tell us exactly what the moon and the sun are, what shape they are, and their patterns through the sky. 1 Enoch 72:37 says they're both equal in size. 1 Enoch 77:3 says they're two great luminaries. The size of the circumference of both is alike. So they're both round in circumference, and they're both the same size. And not a lot of people say, well, yeah, isn't that why it causes an eclipse? Well, let's keep going, though. 1 Enoch 77:13-14 explains that when the moon becomes full on the exact day when the sun sets in the west, from the east she rises at night, and the moon shines the whole night through till the sun rises over against her, and the moon is seen over against the sun, on the side when the light of the moon comes forth. There again, the moon wanes till all the light vanishes, and all the days of the month are at an end, and her circumference is empty, void of light. So the body circumference of the moon itself is empty, void of light. We see this in the phases of the moon, except further explanation in 1 Enoch 77:15-17 says, at night she appears like a man for 20 days each time, and by day she appears like the heaven, and there is nothing else in her except her light. A lot of people wonder what the moon is, specifically from a biblical cosmological perspective. People that have realized that the heliocentric evolutionary perspective is not valid, is not observable, and is speculation that's pushed as fact. So when you look into the cosmological descriptions found within Scripture, you see that it claims there's nothing in the moon except for light, which grows and diminishes throughout the month. If that's the case, what is this thing passing in front of the sun? I want to put forward through this presentation that it is actually the home of Zeus, the home of Olympus, the home of a rebellious angel who doesn't want to cohabitate on the earth amongst mankind. He's always had a home up there for thousands of years.
Whoa, look at that. Oh my God. Here we go. Oh my God, it's coming right over us like a storm. Look at this. Oh my God, we're getting close. Getting close. No filter. Oh my God, Corona, there it is. Diamond Belly's beads, diamond ring. Look at that. Corona, total.
Okay, that dude's hilarious. As you can see on both sides of the screen from left to right, you can still see the clouds that are illuminated by the sun. You can see the small path of totality of this eclipse, because the object that's causing the sun to be blocked is not the same size as the sun. It's a smaller object.
Totality! Oh my God! Look at that! Totality! Oh my God! Look at those streamers! Look at the crumbs! It's all prominences.
Now I want you guys to remember this image that we're seeing and what it looks like. The sun with the small black dot in the center.
Look at that! Prominences! Look at the moon! Red all around! Full shadow! Completely elongated! Oh my God! Like,
So this picture here that we just witnessed, I think it was like 33,000 feet. This is a 2015 partial solar eclipse, or at least that's what they have to call it because it didn't block out all the sun. But this is the same thing with the Great American Eclipse of 2017, where they claimed there was a total eclipse. We also see that it also did not block out half of the Earth. There was only a small path of totality. It's approximately 80 miles in diameter or in width. This is not something the size of the sun. This is not the moon blocking the light of the sun. This is a much smaller object. So this is why when we see depictions like this from a heliocentric narrative of how these shadows, this is an impossible picture, but they show this in school books to kids to try to explain eclipses. It's a lie. It's not true. The moon is not causing eclipses. So I have another quick little thing I want to play. This is from a gentleman named Crow 777. He's a longtime astronomer, high-powered telephoto lens on a huge telescope, very professional, and he actually took some really fascinating eclipse happening. But we're going to watch that his photography, the eclipse. Now I want you guys to watch as we go through this, as he shows the object that's causing the eclipse come in from the right top corner of the screen, and it doesn't get to the center of the sun. It comes down at an angle to the bottom left and then stops and then goes back up towards the top center. So this is not, this is a huge sharp turn this thing is taking. That is not the path of the moon. This is not, we're not watching the path of the moon happen as an eclipse.
But unless you are perfectly tracked and never adjust the view, you're going to get a little bit of this. You would have to be just dead on to speed up to 7,000%. What you see is the moon coming in the upper right, and it's going to skirt down to that little sunspot just below the moon, and then it's actually going to arc up and go across. Now you'll notice as this footage goes in right there, I begin to catch on that I can adjust the new camera better, which, you know, this is new to me because you're getting so much more light when you do this than you do filming at night. But as I began to adjust the f-stop and aperture and all these things, I was actually getting a decent picture considering that this is all homemade stuff.
Do you guys see that? Just what are the chances that he's at an angle where the moon itself is so small and close that it would actually come and stop and then move another direction, almost as if it's making an acute angle, which is a 60-degree interior percentage. Like, I mean, this is an amazing clip that he grabbed. It's truly amazing. Like the moon would not move like this. It's wild. So something to keep in mind as we go forward further into this. Now, remember, we read from one of the Roman philosophers describing this concept of the double-gated dome that we saw, that there was a concept that this is where the palace of Zeus was, enclosed by a double-gated dome. And there's other, if you go on Crow 777's channel, and you'll see that there's other videos where he took where there is a full eclipse happening, and you can see through the interior core of the thing that's eclipsing the sun, and there seems to be areas of the outside that you can see through it. I don't have the clip prepped now, but unfortunately, we do reveal it on my full series, but I'm going through quickly some of this information so you can understand that it is the exact description that we would see from this gentleman from the past describing Mount Olympus. Now in Acts 14:11-13, all the ancient world knew that the gods lived in the sky. This is why when Paul and Barnabas go into a specific city in Asia Minor and they heal someone, the people of the town who were Zeus worshipers, they think that Zeus and Hermes came down to them. They think that Zeus and Hermes came down to them. Do you guys remember in that clip we watched with the Vimanas, I'm reading the ancient texts, and one of those ancient texts that was translated from ancient Babylon, still in Sanskrit, but it was an ancient Babylonian writing about how the gods had given them the power of flight and come down to them in their Vimanas. This was a commonly understood idea in the ancient world of where the gods were and how they traversed down to the surface of the earth and interacted with mankind. The United Nations itself shows the wreath of Zeus, which was the crown of Zeus, encompassing a top-down view of the circle of the earth as depicted by Scripture. because he lives in Mount Olympus, high above the earth, as we read from Homer, right? Sitting in the palace of Mount Olympus with the earth spread underneath him. There's the wreath of Zeus, as all types of signifiers and different types of typology and symbolism. This is just some desks inside the United Nations shaped as in the wreath of Zeus, but also you have the all-seeing eye depiction in the back of the General Assembly room. But we're also going to look at the top of the ceiling of the General Assembly room, which is a large mechanical circle with something in the middle of it. No one ever looks at the roof of the General Assembly room. Do you remember that? Do you remember that still photo we saw from the eclipse at 30,000 feet when it went in the center of the sun? It was a black dot in the center of the sun. We also see the sphere, the black dot in the center with an outer whiter glow on the outside of it as a decorative design on the floor of the Vatican everywhere. We see that same design in the courtyard of the Vatican, as well as the Osiris's obelisk in the center. Here is in one of the courtyard areas of the Vatican, there's an actual mechanical ball that's been designed by a specific artist. These are actually in multiple places around the earth, but they've got one definitely in the Vatican. It's like a mechanical ball, almost like a destroyed Death Star, if you will. There's one in Tel Aviv. There's one in the United Nations out in front of their building in New York. There's 3 in Dublin. Oh, you remember that Unholy Trinity we talked about? So I'm going to play a quick video here because it's fascinating. Now that we're getting an idea for what Mother Babylon could be, where is the home of this rebellious angel that the nations are still worshiping, that was from before the flood, is now after the flood, whom they were worshiping at the Tower of Babel. Has anyone ever caught this thing on actual camera? This is a clip of a weather FAA advisory weather camera that's pointing at the sky over Wolf Creek Pass in southern Colorado. And this one was taken from December 5th of 2021 last year. And this caught something. It's been caught also last year in November 17th of 2021 as well. But this is just one of the clips where there's something ominous, circular and spherical passing in front of the camera that you can barely see. So I'm going to turn the music off because it's annoying, but we'll get to look at this video where if you look closely, and now a lot of people are going to be shouting, oh my gosh, this is just some sort of sunspot on the camera. Yet there are chemtrails passing in front of it. And the thing that I don't get to point out too much, but I'm going to go into greater depth in my 42 series. But if you look at the actual weird shadows on this thing, it looks like it's spotty, right? It looks like it's spotty. Like there's darker areas on it, circular little odd shaped, non-symmetrical placement of darker areas on the outer surface of whatever this thing is. And that's actually depicted in many forms of this spherical thing that's depicted in modern media and cinema, movies, comic books, different cartoons, things like that, video games. It's actually depicted with this type of thing, this type of like spotty outside that's almost like a weird version of camouflage. And so it makes perfect sense as this thing's passing in front of the moon. If you see an uneven level on the exterior circumference of this sphere pass in front of the sun, you might confuse it for a pothole, quote unquote, pothole of the moon. But it's not. I'm putting forward that it's actually whatever the skin of this thing is that creates the camouflage and cloaking effect. Just like we know that the Vimanas, just like we saw that we heard in the clip that I showed earlier from the testimony of ancient Vedic texts, some of the Vimanas were spheres powered by Mercury. So this is one that's been caught passing through the sky over southern Colorado. Now I want you to watch closely as the sun goes over it. Do you guys see the strange shape of it? That there's a hot spot on top of it as the sun passes over it. This is not a lens flare, guys. Very interesting. Very interesting. So this same depiction, as you saw, there's a dark center in this, whatever this thing is, that's being passed and cloaked and passing in front of the camera. Looks just like the hieroglyph of the center inside of the big sphere in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. It's you can see even the little dark spot in the center. Very interesting. And there's the hot spot on the top of it. So real quick, we're going to play a clip that helps us understand some of the science of how this is even possible.
This is a footage of the clouds over Lincoln, Nebraska. It's there to remind us that air is liquid too, or at least it behaves like liquid. Buoyancy, a concept first described over 2,000 years ago, when a man called Archimedes was taking a bath. What buoyancy tells us is that every liquid will exert a force upon an object that is submerged into it. How much force, you ask? The exact same amount as it's needed to displace the liquid around that object. That's why things float in water. If you have a boat that's overall less dense than water, then it would float. Thanks, buoyancy. But air is fluid, so this very same concept should apply here too. And it does. If we were to make a ship that is less dense than air, it would float. That's how zeppelins and hot air balloons work. But hot air balloons are a bit boring compared to a mile-wide floating city. A 119 years ago, a genius was born, Buckminster Fuller. His idea went something like this. Make a sphere 1 mile in diameter to completely enclose the air inside. Warm that air by a few degrees Celsius and then sit back and let the whole sphere float up high. That's it. Did you notice that I didn't mention rockets or some big fans or sails, etc.? That's because the sphere would float just because of buoyancy. We can't directly sense it, but air is heavy. Right now, at this very moment, 10 tons of air is pushing down on you. That's like 10 cars right on top of you. We don't get crushed by that because we have the air inside of us and all that pressure equalizes. But what happens when it doesn't? This gasoline tank can demonstrate just how heavy the air is. The maximum buoyancy force from the air at the sea level at 20 degrees Celsius is 1.2 kilograms per cubic meter. This means that the air can lift the maximum of 1.2 kilograms per cubic meter. The average volume of a hot air balloon is around 3,000 cubic meters. If we were to use this formula, we can calculate that if we were to heat up the air inside of the envelope by 100 degrees Celsius, the density difference that would occur would allow us to lift 760 kilograms with that balloon. But a mile-wide sphere contains way more air than ordinary hot air balloons. 700,000 times more to be exact. 2.5 million tons of air. Since we have more air to work with, we don't have to drastically increase the temperature for us to have a liftoff. We can increase it by just a few degrees. If we were to use the same formula as before, we would see that this sphere could lift 24,000 tons if we were to increase the air temperature by just 5 degrees. Does it take a lot of energy to heat up that much air even by a few degrees? Yes, absolutely. It takes a lot of energy. This much energy to be precise. In other words, we would need a 17 megawatt heater to work without stopping over the period of 10 days to heat up that much air by just 5 degrees. But that's not that much compared to the energy from the sunlight that sphere would receive. The top part of the mild-wide sphere would receive this much energy on a clear day at the equator. That's more than enough energy to heat up all that air. Whether or not this is a feasible idea is out of my knowledge, but nonetheless it's a nice little thought experiment. Imagine that, floating around the globe in a city ship.
He's hilarious. Imagine floating around the world in a city ship. And so we see depictions of this, like I've said, in modern cinema throughout the years. One of the most famous ones is what I have pictured on the screen here. This particular movie in 2015 is a whole premise of the movie, of this Star Wars spinoff movie, is about the the girl trying to get the plans, the blueprints, the schematics for the Death Star into the hands of the rebels so they can know how to destroy it, because the Death Star is a menace. It is always able to destroy them. If you guys go watch that movie, there's a moment like it creates an eclipse the moment it fires. It's very, very interesting, and it's hovering above the surface of this land. But ultimately, this is the story of the scriptures from Genesis 11 to Revelation 20. Is this idea of there is two kingdoms. There's the battle of two kingdoms. And this is the end of our presentation, where I hope to, in the next 15 minutes, bring all of this into a coherent point of not only have we determined who these ancient gods were that were worshipped at the Tower of Babel, the motivations for building the Tower of Babel, their understanding of where they lived in an enclosed cosmology and why they even thought they could reach the creator at the upper levels of the creation model. But then the God that they worshipped has always lived in the air. And it would make sense. He's a rebellious angel. But not only is that, is he's a super intelligent rebellious angel that add more knowledge than mankind. This is the narrative of his origins, being Azazel, one of the rebellious watchers. So it makes perfect sense that he would want to have his own place away from mankind, all the chaos and potential danger, all the things that transpire among mankind on the earth. But it's a battle of kingdoms. Because why? Because the world is fooled in worshiping his sign in the sky. And they love when his sign passes in front of the light and can be seen. They go crazy. It's a huge day for them. Now, the world has been, sold this heliocentric narrative, right, for fooling them into thinking what is actually passing in front of the sun. But those who worship the occult, know exactly what the all-seeing eye is, which many times is represented as the big G. And I don't think it's, the whole lie of the heliocentric narrative is based upon G, which is the calculation for gravity. I don't think there's any coincidence there. Very interesting. Very interesting. In First Enoch 69, there is a reference to the rebellious angel that fooled Eve in the garden, and his name is Gadriel. Starts with a G. Now, I don't know if that's the same G that's being inferred there. I'm not sure. I just think it's interesting. Satan goes by many names in Scripture: the dragon, Mastema, Satan himself. That he the deceiver, the evil one, these things like that. He goes by many different names, but Azazel, like I mentioned before, and it's fascinating to me that he wants to be physically and literally between you and the Creator, so that he intercepts your worship. It's part of his greatest deception, is to make you think there is no upper worlds of the heaven now, that we live in this vast void of space. And the world is prepping the return and the reintroduction of Zeus to the world. And I cover that in my 42 series. But let's dive a little bit into the scriptures that define and explain to us this battle of kingdoms, the battle between the sphere and the New Jerusalem. Because it's the New Jerusalem that's coming down to the earth as the promised kingdom come. So this thing has to get out of the way. And we're shown this in Revelation 12, verse 1. This is when this begins the 42 months before the return of the Messiah. The 42 months where a lot of things start to happen. Apollyon is released. Satan is attacking the nations via the first and second beast. And it's because at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over your people, will rise up. So the Bible describes angels being assigned to the earth for different things. They have different missions they go on. Well, one of the angels that has been assigned to covenant Israel is this angel named Michael. He is not greater than Yeshua. Yeshua has now been glorified and resurrected, according to the narrative of Scripture, who is the high priest in the high temple on the top layer of the creation model, serving Yahweh himself. So the Son of God has been given all authority in heaven and earth, and Michael is under the authority of the Son of God. But Michael still has a job that's been given to him throughout the years, and that is to be a sense of a prince over the people of Yahweh, that is the covenant Israel scattered throughout all the earth. And it's prophesied in Daniel 12 that there will be a time when Michael himself stands up. And then that's part one, that's step one. And then there will be a time of distress, like of which has not occurred from the beginning of nations until that time. This is the 42 months of tribulation outlined in Revelation. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book of life will be delivered. This is the promise of the resurrection that happens at the end of the 42 months. We see this expounded upon, this moment when Michael, this angel, stands up. How does he stand up? What does that mean? What's that language talk about him standing up? It's him actually coming and fighting the dragon. Revelation 12, 7-9. Then a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was not strong enough, and no longer was any place found in heaven for him and his angels. The word angels means messengers. Who are the messengers of Satan, as we revealed from Jubilees and Enoch? It's the unclean spirits. What did we talk about the Greek word cosmos kratos, which is translated to English as cosmic powers? Evil, wicked, cosmic powers in high places, as mentioned in Ephesians 6:10. It's Satan and the unclean spirits who rule in the high air above. It's literally the definition of that Greek word. It's the description, the origin, and the depiction of Satan and the unclean spirits throughout all of history, and all of the ancient cultures knew it as well. So when Michael comes from above the firmament down into our enclosure and actually attacks the dragon, kicks him out of his place of authority, the palace of Mount Olympus. I would also say this is the fire in hell that's raining from one of the trumpets at that time as well, the first trumpet. That is actually part of what destroys it and knocks the place he's been staying in this whole time, the sphere that's in the sky, knocks it out of the ground. And it'll crash to earth and cause a lot of problems. But this is the moment when Michael actually fights the dragon. And therefore, there's no longer any place in heaven. Now, this isn't talking about above the firmament where the angels live in the upper areas of the creation model. This is just as described where Zeus lives, in the sky above, which is anything above the mountains in a scriptural reference is referred to as the heaven, the area of the heaven, that what's Genesis 1:19 and 20 defines as the open heaven, the sky where the clouds are and the birds fly. So this is one of the references of the use of the term heaven in scripture. And there's no longer any place found for him and his angels in heaven anymore. They've been thrust to the earth. And what does it say? And the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. This is what kicks off the 42 months of tribulation leading up to the days when Yeshua returns. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. And it goes on to say in the following verses, woe to the earth and the inhabitants therein, for the Satan's come down to you, and he's full of wrath and fury. This is what begins the 42 months of tribulation. He literally loses his house. He gets evicted. And he can't stop it. He cannot overpower Michael and the servants of God. He loses his place of authority. He loses his what I would suggest he's shamed and humiliated. He's debased. Revelation 18, 1-3. I cried out and the angel cried out in a mighty voice, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a lair for demons and haunt for every unclean spirit, every unclean bird, and every detestable beast. Luke 4, 3-5, when Yeshua is being tempted, one of those temptations, Satan takes him to a really high mountain. The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world, just as described of Mount Olympus from ancient Greek and Roman historians. Matthew 4, 8-11, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain. This is the parallel of that same temptation, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their glory. That's only possible from the description of Mount Olympus. And then at this particular point of this temptation, it says, then the devil left him and the angels came and ministered to him. And this would make perfect sense why at this particular temptation, the angels came to help Jesus, because he has to get down. Why does he have to get down? Because in the moment, after the temptations, after Yeshua sends his disciples out to the towns of Samaria and gives them the authority to cast out unclean spirits from people as they go minister, and then the disciples come back in Luke 10 and they're all excited and they're talking to Jesus about, man, we kicked out demons, even the demons obey us. And Yeshua says, his response immediately is, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I've given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. So he's trying to give them a perspective, right? Don't be excited that you got spiritual power and authority. Be excited that you're going to take part in the resurrection. This is the promise of salvation for mankind. And he tries to show them who truly is the big dog in their scenario and their hierarchy of discipleship, because he explains to them, you think you're something because you have authority to kick out unclean spirits. I saw their leader. I talked to their leader and saw him fall like lightning from heaven. When did he fall like lightning from heaven? It's not before the world began. That's a Catholic idea that was invented around the 5th century. It's this moment here, in this temptation, where he tells Satan, away from me, Satan. And it says the devil left him. The devil fled from him, from this place, this high mountain, this Mount Olympus that he took him to, like lightning, fell from heaven like lightning. This is why he's explaining to his disciples, you think you've got something because you can kick out an unclean spirit of somebody? I dealt with their boss, and he fled away from me like lightning. He scurried away. And from heaven. So the disciples he's talking to, they know the Hebrew equivalent of Satan is the Greek equivalent of Zeus and the Egyptian equivalent of Ra. They know this information. This is established historical information. They know this. So when Yeshua is referring to Satan, they know this is a real character that can appear to them. They know he's a rebellious angel that the nations worship and think is Zeus. And they know where he lives. They know where the home of Zeus is. Revelation 18, 20 through 21, with such violence, the great city of Babylon will be cast down, never to be seen again. Now, the interesting part of this is that the comparison to when Babylon is cast down is as if a mighty angel picks up a stone the size of a great millstone. So now it's comparing, as you see this faint image in the weather camera passing over Wolf Creek Pass in southern Colorado, just like the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt, depicting the shape of this type of sphere, this Mother Babylon sphere, and what it looked like. Now it's being described as a millstone being cast down with great violence. This was an ancient millstone. It's a circumference object with a center hole, just like the image of the eclipse that we saw. Isaiah 26, 1 through 6. Prophecy about the day of the Lord. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. Salvation is established as its walls and ramparts. Open the gates so a righteous nation may enter, one that remains faithful. You will keep in perfect peace the steadfast of mind, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, because God the Lord is the rock eternal, for he has humbled those who dwell on high. He lays the lofty city low. He brings it down to the ground. He casts it into the dust. Feet trample it down, and the feet of the oppressed and the steps of the poor. Again, there's a moment when the Father sends his angels and said, okay, we're going to kick this all off. The time has come for the trumpet to be blown. We're going to kick this all off. This is after Yeshua in Revelation 5 starts opening the scrolls. And Michael, accompanied by fire and hell and ice, shows up to destroy Mother Babylon, kick it out of the sky, and Satan is forced to physically remain on the earth because he's lost his home. This is when the beast comes out of the pit. This is when the second beast is there with him. This is when the three of them try to exert themselves and conquer the nations. He's come out of hiding, so to speak. And now it's tyranny time. And he only has 42 months before Yeshua comes through the firmament to stop them all. So they try to do as much as they can, but that whole time they're going to be buffeted and interrupted from mass world domination because of the two witnesses. It's a very fascinating story. Very fascinating story. So we're going to go into greater depth in my new series that we've already started called the 42 series, Countdown to Messiah. And we've already completed episode 1 of my series on my channel, Kingdom and Context. If you guys haven't already visited and subscribed to us, I highly encourage you to do that. We're both on Rumble and YouTube, and soon to be on Lighthouse. So this will be another 21 parts where we delve deeper into the eschatology, the prophecy, and some of these details that have been outlined in our Investigating Babylon series.